Hey everyone, Reese here, and welcome back to another episode of WSL Pure One Ocean. Hopefully, this podcast is coming to you in good health wherever you are. Hopefully, you're staying safe out there. It is July. It is July 2nd, and for many of us in the environmental space, that means Plastic Free July. And you've probably seen the hashtag. You've maybe even taken the pledge. I mean, the movement has been around for a while, and it's touched hundreds of millions of people around the world. And this simple little concept of setting a time frame and kind of choosing your path to go plastic free has been surprisingly effective at getting people to at least improve their relationship with plastic, if not change their behavior altogether. So we're dedicating this whole month to Plastic Free July. We're going to be talking to someone new each week working in and around plastic pollution, and we're going to be hearing from you. That's right. We want to hear what you have to say. So stick around at the end of the episode. We have a voice memo from one of our friends in the WSL Pure Network, but we want to hear what you're doing to go plastic free. So shoot us a voice memo at oneocean@wslpure.org and we'll get you set up. And back to this week's episode. To kick us off, we thought there was no one better to chat with than the founder of the movement herself, Rebecca Prince-Ruiz. Rebecca was a delight to speak with. She has so much intricate knowledge in how to motivate people to change their behavior for the better. She founded Plastic Free July in 2011, and it's evolved into a global movement. It's touched 250 million people across 177 countries, and they've all reduced and refused their single-use plastic in their daily lives. She's got 25 years of experience. She's a wealth of knowledge, and it shows. I learned a ton in this conversation, and I hope that you do too. Here's Rebecca of Plastic Free July. Rebecca, thanks for joining the show, and thanks for being here. And it's a pleasure to connect.
Thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. And, I feel like lots of people are very familiar with Plastic Free July as a movement and maybe have seen it hashtagged on things and maybe have gone to the organization behind it. But we wanted to get all the way back to the founder, to you. And so before we dive in, I would love just quickly, maybe you can tell everyone a little bit about yourself. How do you identify and, who are you and what's your backstory?
So I think I identify as someone who has been, who cares for the impact that I have and the difference that I make in this world. I think like many, that kind of came from a really young age. I spent a lot of my formative years growing up on a farm in the southwest of Western Australia, and we needed to leave the farm when I was 9, and I don't think I ever forgave my parents for that. And it was because there'd been too much clearing in the area and salinity levels in the local rivers were rising. And I think that for me planted a seed that I've taken with me throughout my life. Never quite got used to growing up in the city, but here in Perth. I live in Fremantle, but very fortunate to live close to the beach. And I think from those early seeds of environmental awareness, and grew up in a family that were very socially conscious. My mum was always doing stuff in the local community. Set me up to following a path, whereas my studies were in science, but I always liked that aspect of the interface between people and communities and the environment, and that's a journey that I'm continuing to go on for this day and still learning every day.
I love it. That's a great story. And you have a long history in this space beyond Plastic Free July. Looking up your bio, I mean, you have a number of kind of roles that you fulfilled across the years, which is pretty rad. But we want to talk about Plastic Free July. It's July. And I feel like some people still don't really know what it is, maybe. And maybe that's just me. Maybe it's that's the American perspective. I'm not sure. Maybe it's, very clear in Australia. But what is Plastic Free July? Like, let's just start there. What is the most tight definition of Plastic Free July?
So Plastic Free July is a personal challenge that's part of a global movement to reduce single-use plastics for a cleaner planet.
That is a
That's
really
it in a
nice,
nutshell.
tight answer. That was a good. You've done this before.
I'm pretty much quoting from the website, so which took us many weeks to get that tight.
That's all the creative work that went into it. So it's all baked in there now. Okay. That's what it is. Now it's been around 11 years, 9 years, something like
Well,
that. Take us
it's
back to the
kind of
founding story without giving us every trial and tribulation along the way. How did we get started and how long has it been?
so this is our 10th plastic free July here in 2020. But it's
Congratulations.
but it's not really a 10th anniversary because I only had the genius idea to try and avoid single-use plastics for a month, about a week before July. So it was a really spontaneous decision. I never set out to start a global movement. It was really just about changing myself. And it started from visiting a recycling facility. That's where when your curbside recycling gets picked up, that it's called a materials recovery facility, because actually all it does, as we now all know, it just sorted the different materials into different types: paper, plastic, metal, glass, and the different types of plastics. Then they're baled and then they're shipped either across the country or overseas to be reprocessed. And that was a really eye-opening moment for me, Reese. I knew what landfills looked like. I used to have to always go to the tip with my dad. But going to a recycling facility just blew me away. I knew what my waste looked like when I put out my curbside bin each week, but I didn't know what mine looked like with my neighbours, with everyone else in my street, with everyone else in my community. And seeing the enormity of that volume together really blew me away, and then understanding the particular challenges. And to be honest, I think I thought, like, if I could fill that recycling bin each fortnight, I was doing the planet a favour. And of course, recycling is important, but I knew at that moment that the best thing I could do would not to put out that bin, or to put out a lot less. And that night when I went to put out my recycling, I just looked at this. I think it was a yogurt container. I knew this material was going to last forever. I could picture in my mind where it was going to go, and I thought, well, what other choices could I have made? What could I have done differently? And so I'm quite impulsive. And the next morning I went to work and said to my two colleagues, Amy and Nabila, hey, I'm going plastic free next month. Who wants to join me? And so my colleagues from my office, I was working in local government in waste and sustainability education at the time, did a lot of education about recycling. And this was our opportunity. We're just going to look at this reducing. And look, I'd heard about people doing challenges before. I'd watched No Impact Man. I'd even heard of people doing a plastics challenge. But for me, it was just a deeply, deeply personal decision. And about 40 of our volunteers joined in, and we just gave it a go. And the next month just happened to be July.
I love it. I love it. You touched on so many things there that really resonate, from visiting a recycling center and seeing that we don't actually recycle. We really just sort, and we don't really sort that efficiently, and we don't really recycle that efficiently. I've been lucky to to sail with the Five Gyres Institute and get to know Marcus and Anna with their research into plastic pollution. And they once took us to a very high-tech materials recovery facility in Brooklyn that has the whole optical sorters and conveyor belts and super high-tech. Whereas here in Southern California, the local facility near our World Surf League office is in Santa Monica, and it's an all manual sort. And when you see all your waste just get dumped on conveyor belts, and human beings literally picking out what they can, only the high value items, and the rest just being, crunched up to go off to landfill, and start to understand that process a little more fully, it is truly eye-opening. I mean, it is a shocker. We actually, I took a group of WSL employees to go see it and said, hey, let's go. We're going to go see where everything goes. So you understand why it's important that we get our internal office recycling a little bit better and reduce our overall output. And I feel like that, like if there's one field trip kids should take during school, maybe that should be the one, right? Like not to the beach, not anywhere else. It's like that's the one that should be mandatory curriculum.
Yeah, look, I'm absolutely with you there. I think everyone should. I think you should, as ratepayers, unless we go to the recycling facility, you get an extra $100 on your rates. I don't know, but when we did this design of that website, I took the whole graphic design team there just so they could understand. And I think you're right. Seeing people dealing with our waste, like it's not going away. It doesn't just disappear when we put it on our bin at the curb. It goes somewhere. And for me, it was really that now I know where it goes and I can't keep doing this.
Yeah. I've pulled up your website here, and for those listening and not watching, I encourage you to go to plasticfreejuly.org. The website's beautiful. I had seen it a couple of years ago, and it's clearly been updated. It looks fantastic. You have some great video here. You talk about the challenge and what the challenge is, and it's got a whole lot here to help educate people. I think it's really fantastic. Is there anything in particular that you might want to call out to people to help them go on this journey? Like, what's that key first step? Like for you, was it that there were 40 other people involved, or was it just the commitment of 1 month and the time frame? I'm kind of curious, like what makes it so effective?
Yeah, so the key first up is just signing up, taking the challenge. And that's not that you have to avoid all single use plastics. It's not that you have to do it for the whole month. Choose, we always say, like, choose your plastic free July. And it's about choice. And it's choosing one or two things. And our motto is very much, we're not about getting a handful of people or 100 people to do this perfectly, to be zero waste, to fit their year's worth of landfill waste in a jar. Great that some people can do that, but what we're about is getting thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people to do just a few small things and then take it from there. So when we first did it, I've got to admit, it was a lot harder than I thought. And by doing it personally, and you'll see from those images when you have a look at the website, we're really, really focused on solutions. We don't, of course, I'm very, at a personal level, very deeply motivated by the ocean plastic pollution problem. But we don't focus on that in Plastic Free July. We just focus on solutions. And what we found at first, this all happened in absolutely intuitively, like it is a grassroots campaign. We've achieved that 250 million people with zero advertising budget. Like, this is word of mouth. This is people on the street, in their home, as they're shopping, making the changes that they can make. And doing it together is really important for a number of reasons. One is you get ideas from other people and you learn their stories and you find out, oh, this was the challenge this person faced. Like we often, I can bet you, every year on the 1st of July, we get people writing saying, oh, Rebecca, I failed Plastic Free July because I've just ordered a drink and I got a plastic straw, or I got two straws and I've failed. And we always say, oh, there's no such thing as failing. And I just point out the first thing is about realizing that there's all this plastic that we're using. And
Right.
a week ago, probably wouldn't have even noticed you got a drink with a straw. And now you did. And maybe the first time you asked, you did fail, but someone else will then say, well, I had a conversation when I ordered that drink and said, look, I'm doing Plastic Free July. It's really important to me that I don't get a plastic straw. And then you get other people saying, well, they didn't tell their friends, but they went out for a drink. They said no plastic straw. And then the other people around the table said, oh, actually, we don't need one either. And you start to change other people's behavior simply by acting. And, they always say that saying, actions speak louder than words. I think that's so important. And so Plastic Free July not only gives you ideas and tools and resources, but doing it with other people, and part of what is now a global movement, I think is absolutely important. And then you don't feel alone. You don't feel awkward because it's like, well, I can't take this because I'm doing Plastic Free July. So it's kind of an excuse as well.
Yeah. It's funny, you touch on the kind of like the rate of failure and allowing for a little bit of that. Like it's okay if you get a straw and then you just go, okay, well, let me just avoid the next one, you know? It's so funny how often people, just with habit and, oh no, I failed on my commitment and thus it's all for naught. It's like, no, just, skip the next one and the next infinity after that, you know? And I think it's really challenging, especially, we kind of were talking about this before, but trying to pick and choose your battles. There are certain areas that, I think of friends who are young parents and they're, worried about some of the products that they end up consuming or they purchase on behalf of their children. And there's just a reality to our existence that you're going to run into some plastic. But to the extent that you can avoid a lot of the single use stuff and do your best, I try to tell people, like do as much as you can, and realize that it's okay once in a while, especially now. I think with COVID, it's really brought all this, with COVID-19, we're kind of adjusting to this new reality of like, well, okay, medical equipment is one area where single use probably makes sense, but, coffee cups probably don't make sense. And what is that line? Because we've now seen there was that paper put out about single use items are actually safe in a COVID world as long as they're getting washed. So it's this really interesting line of like determining where you're making your most environmental impact and trying to focus on those areas. I don't know. Do you share that sentiment at all, or do you find that there are certain things that it's like optimized for those first big items and then try to, over time you'll work on that final 20%, right? But how do you fix the first 80%? I don't know. The perfection idea, I feel like just run like people think of plastic free July, they go, I can't possibly go entirely plastic free,
Yeah.
That wasn't a question. It was just a ramble, but I figure there's something to react to in that.
Yeah, and that's why, the message that we have is choose to refuse, because plastic-free July can sound really daunting because you think it's everything and I got to do it for a month. And that's why when people sign up, we give them the option. You can do it for a day or a week. I think that the first, I don't know if it was 80%, Reese, but the first, I reckon we've probably in our house reduced our plastics by about 70%. I've got
Wow.
to say now my kids are older teenagers and young adults. It's a bit harder because they're bringing more plastic into the home than I used to. It was much easier when they were younger. But it was like the first stuff I got rid of was much easier than the stuff now. I thought I was pretty good because I always took my reusable shopping bag, carried my water bottle with me. But then what it does, it just makes you so aware, and you will always be aware after doing this challenge of just the plastic around you. But it was, I hadn't thought about those plastic produce bags or the packaging on my fruit and vegetables. So that, that was one of the next big things for me. But then I still did, I needed to get one plastic bag a week because I had to line my rubbish bin with a plastic bag. So it was learning to compost my food scraps, and then I could just line my bin with the local newspaper each week. So I didn't even need those plastic bags. It was, and one of the first things I did, and many people will do, was I just switched from plastic to paper and metal and glass. So I just bought everything in tins or cardboard boxes, and then you realize there was the bag in there. And or I just use those paper mushroom bags. But then I realized I don't want to switch one problem for another problem, and everything takes resources. So it was just a matter of starting to tackle, one thing at a time. And the first thing was, right, well, I'm wanting to avoid this buying hummus in a plastic tub, so I'm going to make it myself. Well, then I bought the chickpeas in a tin, but then it's like, well, then I learned the tin's lined in plastic, and a tin's still a tin, and so then I bought it in a big plastic bag of chickpeas and soaked it, and realized I could save 10 tins, and that felt like a better thing to do. And then I found I could make it from a bulk food store. Then I found I could make double and then freeze a batch for another time, or just freeze it in some glass jars. So it kind of, you start with one thing and you go on a journey. And I think if you try and do everything at once, it's easier to feel overwhelmed or overcommitted, and it's easier to fail. Whereas if you just think, well, I'm just going to do this year, and then next year I'm going to try this, or we're just going to try this for Plastic Free July. And then I realized that, spending an hour and a half making my own pasta on a weeknight is probably not sustainable. So I'm going to buy it in a cardboard box, and maybe I'll do it when I have a dinner party on the weekend. So it's about what's realistic here,
Right.
and putting in learning more habits and new skills and new options in my local community over time. So it's a journey, and I'm definitely still on the journey myself.
You land journey is the word that I use a lot when talking about this. It's like you start with one thing and it kind of opens your mind up. And I'm going to give a lot of credit to my wife, Annie, here. She is hardcore on the journey. I mean, we both are, but she went next level one year. And I'm going to share, this is going to be a little bit embarrassing, but I'm literally going to allow us to root through our garbage here. We actually collected our waste over the course of about a month. And this is a video from that. I think it was a little over a month. We don't eat any meat, and so or at least very very little, at least, and almost none at home. So our packaging in here is really just kind of the stuff that we buy. So it's tempeh packages, some cheese, some chips, and this kind of was eye opening for us because it really just was like, oh, okay, you can start to see it and then identify, well, what do we need to reduce? There's some receipts, there's some ties on some veggies. This is from the waste bin in the bathroom. So really what this informed us was chips were they were the big killer. Previously it had been yogurt, but then we had stopped doing that once my wife started making yogurt. And then it was chips. We were like, man, we got to kick our chip habit because they just come in those bags. And so we switched over to popcorn. That was our crunchy, salty end of work day. You can buy the kernels in bulk and then make popcorn. And so that was like our little solve that we loved. So it was I don't know, she just did it one day. She just decided, like, we're going to keep all of our trash for the next month. And then we did it, and it was pretty eye opening, and it helped us identify, all right, where is most of the waste coming from? And then you have to weigh that against what other choices you're making environmentally, right? Like tempeh for us is a protein source because we're not eating a lot of meat. And so we justify purchasing that once in a while. We haven't yet found a bulk source for that. So I don't know, do you ever encourage waste audits as kind of a next level? Is that like the master level, or some next level of certification once you've gone beyond the straw, the bag, the bottle? Curious.
Yeah, I do. I love a good bin audit myself. Also,
I thought you'd
also,
be like-minded company here.
oh, absolutely. I also we encourage like organizations and businesses and schools to do it as well. And also, if you're starting the challenge, I don't think you need to go necessarily, full tarp and high vis PPE to do it, but just open your bin, have a look in there, or out your bin that goes on the curb, or the bins inside, or just do the audit on your pantry, do the audit when you bring the shopping home, do the audit on your fridge, see what the plastics that in your life are, because we're all um, using and consuming different plastics. So I always recommend people start with looking at the plastic and the waste in their life, and tackling the one or two things that they want to get started with. And some of them are definitely more problematic than others. It can be quite confronting. But in this, I mentioned that when I started Plastic Free July, I was doing working in local government in waste and sustainability education, and that's literally what we did on the first night of the course. We got an anonymous households bins, laid out a tarpaulin, tipped it into the middle, and then we made signs around the edges of recycling, reuse, composting, special disposal, and or going to the second-hand shop.
Uh-huh.
And it's actually incredible. And then you had landfill. At the moment, it was all destined for landfill. But when you actually went through somebody's bin, you realised how many different choices you could have fairly easily made in terms of disposal, but also products that could have been reused. So it's a great source of ideas and inspiration. Can
Yeah.
be confronting though.
Looking at your own garbage. One of the other things I picked up on, I think maybe you're on another podcast, you mentioned working with a behavioral economist at some point. Is that correct? Have you as an organization worked with a behavioral economist and talk about that work?
Yeah, so that has been the
If you don't
most.
mind sharing, I don't know if that's like your
Yeah,
secret
yeah.
sauce. I'm kind of curious. So.
The behavioral economist is definitely my secret sauce. So I think, look, in the early days, because we never set out to start a campaign. It was never about educating others. It was how do we change ourselves? And it's hard. And it was really a journey of let's make this easier, compile all the resources for ourselves and our community. But so we got things right intuitively. So back in 2016, I did a Churchill Fellowship and spent 2 months traveling around the world, talking to organisations and people working on the plastics issue, doing the research and developing solutions. And I realised then just how big Plastic Free July was. I knew we had incredible reach. I knew we had participation, but at the end of from talking to organisations around the world, sure many of the colleagues we'd have in common, Reese. But what I didn't know at the end of the day is, was it making a difference? And for me, I think that goes back to that values thing that I spoke about earlier. Like, if at the end of the day we had this thing going viral on social media, hashtag Plastic Free July trending each year. At the end of the day, if that didn't make a difference to what happened to people's bins and their waste, like it for me, it had no purpose. And so I'd heard of the work of a behavioral economist before. I'd been to a presentation. His name's Colin Ashton Graham, and I really wanted to understand more about the impact, but I also got this sense of, everywhere I traveled in the world, everyone was like me, like we're all on the same page in this plastic pollution activism space. What I wanted to do with Plastic Free July is I wanted to make sure we spoke to a mainstream audience, that we were speaking to the general public, that we were getting those 8 out of 10 people who say they're concerned about plastic waste ending up in landfill and in the environment, but still using single-use plastics. Like, I wanted to speak to that mainstream audience. So we started working with Colin back in 2017, and it was look, I absolutely recommend everyone who is working in this space around trying to change people's behaviour is to do it in an informed and a measured way. And so we started this process, which we very much continue today, and we can learn a lot from psychology and from behavioural science. And we started out by doing a research piece. We did surveys of people who are participating in the campaign. So you'll see on that homepage, and I'd love you to share the link, Reese. We call it the Pesky Plastics Quiz. So we asked people a number of questions about their consumer choices and their behaviours and their attitudes. And what this survey does is it kind of also nudges people's behaviour, because everyone is, the majority of people are aligned on this issue, but it leads you through a journey of looking at all the plastics in your life and realising, oh, yeah, I am good at that, those top 4, bags and water bottles and straws and coffee cups, but I could do this, this and this. And so what that survey and that research piece gave us was an idea of, look, where are people really at? What are the behaviours that they're already doing? And what you look for from a behaviour change perspective is getting social norming and getting changes in behaviour that are already done by a portion of the population, and then you've got another portion of people that are willing to make a try. Because what we find, so in terms of the of the reporting, people are notoriously bad at self-reporting on their own behaviors. So we look for behaviors that there's a portion of people already doing and people are willing to give it a go, and look for those. We learn about giving people choice. So you don't just say go plastic free. It's like, here's 10 things that people like you are doing to reduce their plastic waste. We don't use language like do this, do that, you do this. It's choose this. It's many people in your community are doing this. It's join millions of people worldwide. And when you give people a list of 10 things to do, maybe one or two they're already doing, and then, I could do this, and then I could maybe move on to that. That choice is really important. And one of the big things for me that I learned, because, I lived in an eco bubble because everyone I know is like me. And when we were designing materials like posters and stuff, like we would have to go, Colin said we had to test it. And I'm like, yeah, Colin, we test everything. He's like, not your colleagues, not your friends at the farmer's market. You have to go out into the suburbs, go to the malls, go to the shopping centres, go onto the streets, and you give people what you've designed and you ask them, what is this saying to you? What does it mean to you? What is it telling you to do? Is it for people like you? Would you recommend this to your friends? And I realised we were just not on message at all. We were, and there's particular, and that's why that stop and say no message and that don't message, it appeals to the eco activists, whereas that choose to refuse message appealed to much more of a mainstream audience. So it was such a journey, and my state of Western Australia a couple of years ago, we introduced the lightweight plastic bag ban, and Colin and I worked on that, and I interview him in the book about that. And again, the messaging there wasn't about the turtles, and it wasn't about banning plastic bags. The message was, you can take a reusable bag. You can be a juggler if you've got one or two items and just carry. You can take a box. Or I think the juggler was like, you can shop naked. It was giving people choice. It was those
Right.
prompts of, when you empty your shopping bags, put them in your boot of your car or with your keys or by the front door. It was about solutions. And he has this great line in the book where he says, if you just talk about the turtles and environmental doom, all you end up with is no shopping bag, and you feel miserable. Whereas if you talk about all of these great solutions, then people think, oh yeah, this is for me, I can do this.
There's so much. There was so much in there, what you just shared. I mean, the intentionality of your language and the choices of the words that you use and how important that is. I mean, a lot of the people who listen to the show are people who are a part of this, that they would be in your eco bubble. But I think it's a really good message for everyone to hear as we think about the various campaigns that we're working on, whether it's on plastic or another issue, just that intentionality of language, getting outside of your eco bubble and speaking to the others who need to hear it. I come from a background in startups, building digital products, and we always used to talk about that user experience and how do you make sure you're not just designing to fill your own niche and you have all sorts of cursive knowledge of the insiderness of your world. You got to get outside of that and get to the person if you're going to convince anyone else and make any change. So there's so many great lessons it sounds like you just shared. I am really curious, what is, if you could pick one, what is one of the greatest lessons you've learned in your experience? Is it one of those, or is there another lesson maybe in your now 10 years doing this? Because you have all this experience. I'm curious, like, what's that one lesson for someone out there who's thinking about starting a new campaign locally or thinking about ways that they can, be a bigger part of this journey?
Oh, that's a tricky one.
I told you I wouldn't give you any tough ones, but I guess that one's.
Oh, look, I mean, my first reaction would be to say, don't is to say don't judge other people and don't presume because people aren't doing the same things as you that they don't. It doesn't mean that they don't care. Going back to those surveys, 80% of people say that they're concerned about this issue of plastic pollution. So just because somebody's using a bag or a straw or getting stuff in plastic, it doesn't mean that. And I do think that's probably my strongest message for people who are in this space, who are the activists, who are the campaigners on the overwhelming number of issues facing our environment. We are in this time where the legacies of our the throwaway society we have become, the legacies of injustice. There's so many issues going on in the world right now,
Right.
I think it's that don't presume that and don't judge and don't think that people care. And it's about and think that the corollary of that is that actions speak louder than words, and give people something they can do. Not everyone is going to turn up at a protest or write a letter or lobby their local politicians or call out businesses for their products. Like, those are all really important things, but probably 80% of people aren't going to do that. So what can they do? How can their actions and those own individual changes add up to make a response that's going to change these fundamental problems that are in our systems? And that goes beyond environment. That goes to all of these other difficult challenges and injustices that our world is facing now.
Yeah.
It's too important not to act.
Totally. I think it's a great answer. And I think some of what I take away from that is, there's the individual versus the larger systemic issues too. And sometimes there's this fight within the environmental movement. We've talked about this a lot on the show, of like, how much is the individual consumer responsible for versus the bigger systemic industry and all that. But the truth is, we need action on both, right? We need them both. What Plastic Free July does, by engaging people who maybe weren't doing anything environmentally and bringing them into that sort of world, now it opens their eyes. Yes, it'll make some impact in their personal life, and that will be a large impact if they really go down the journey. But if they also then are able to vote in the right way, if they're also able to engage, and then maybe eventually they do write the letter, they do show up at their local city council meeting or their shire, meeting, and are able to speak up in a bigger way. And so we have to think about it like that. Is everything we're facing, we need everybody. So we need, the campaigns that speak very intentionally to that individual person and individual action, like what you're doing, but knowing that it's also a bigger thing, which you've proven through behavioral economics, which is really awesome. So I would say, yeah, we need both. You, on the subject of having lessons learned, are publishing a book, which I didn't even know when we asked you to be on this podcast, which is very fortuitous. It comes out next month, right? Or this month, I guess, by the time this airs.
So my book, which I just have here in my
there you go.
hot little hands.
And it's Plastic Free, the inspiring story of a global environmental movement and why it matters, right?
Yes, it is a bit of a mouthful, that title. So it's published here in Australia and New Zealand in July, and will be published in the US and the rest of the world by Columbia University Press in December. And it is there's a lot of behavioral economics in there. You'll be pleased to know. It's really the story of the journey that I've been on, but most importantly, it's the story of the people who have participated. And I 100% agree with you, Reese. Like, it's not we need behavior change or systems change. Like, we absolutely need both. But I think what I've learned over the last 10 years is they're much more closely aligned than I ever would have expected. So I think that what the behavior change, like changing our individual behaviors, does, not only taking us on that journey, but it also, when you're getting a lot of people to do it and you're making those broad scale changes of 5%, that's when business and governments are really listening. And I think that it's been that rise in incredible citizen action around the world by so many people and so many organizations and not-for-profits and groups of people around the world that have made these changes. That's how we've started to get plastic bag bans, or the bans on microbeads, or container deposit schemes, or big business switching from plastic to paper straws. That comes from those individual changes. And some of the stories I explore in the book are unpacking those changes. So I'll give you an example. Last year, Air New Zealand announced for Plastic Free July they were doubling down on their plastic reduction efforts
Right.
and removing 55 million pieces from their operations that year. And when I interviewed the head of sustainability at Air New Zealand and said, well, how did this come about? How did you hear of Plastic Free July? When you unpacked it and you looked back, there was an employee that took the challenge, and she made changes in her own life. And then the next
Wow.
year she took it into the workplace, and they did a staff engagement challenge around the world on Yammer. It was the most successful staff campaign ever. They made lots of changes. And at the same time, the most frequent letter of complaint that they were getting from their customers,
Right.
many of them who were doing Plastic Free July, was around their use of single-use plastics. And then, as an organisation, they took on a review and an audit across their operations and supply chains of the plastics.
That's amazing.
So, and there's so many stories like that. Governor Cuomo in New York proclaimed July as Plastic Free Month and encouraged all the residents of New York to take on Plastic Free July. And again, there was one of the assemblywomen, Michelle Salages, who learned about the plastic pollution problem, Googled it, took the challenge 5 or 6 years ago, and has slowly been introducing it into the assembly there. So I think that unless we change ourselves, we can't expect to change the system. And I do think that it's a necessary part of it. Obviously, we've got a long way to go on this issue, but those stories do really hearten me.
Yeah, I mean, that's really powerful. Both of those, I didn't know about them. Well, I'm gonna have to get my hands on the book and give it a good read, and we'll of course link to it in the show notes here. All right, I want to move on to some questions from fans. We've got a couple listeners who sent in a few questions here. So let's quickly wrap up with one or two questions. One, how to engage governments in the tropical majority countries for waste management? What's your quick answer? This one's from our friend Beyond the Surface International. She works in a lot of developing countries.
So, one of the best things I think to do is talk to your local representative, get them to take the challenge. I think, again, when they do it personally, then that's where you really get to make that change. So challenge them to do it. Do it yourself as a community. Challenge your government to do it. And also look at what everyone's always comparing themselves. This is particular, I think, with governments and corporate sectors. Share stories with them. Well, this government's doing this, and we'd like you to take on this.
I like that. There was another one around from Wonder Surfed. Has anyone ever tried to hold a city or a county liable for cleaning up the beaches? Which I believe they are, kind of, but has anyone ever actually tried to hold them liable? Do you know of? Has anyone ever?
I'm not aware of that. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I'm
I know obviously
curious.
jurisdictions like in, California, you have that zero trash to waterways policy. So I think there will be increasingly accountability. Um, I think there needs to be accountability also from business on that, and not just at the municipality level as well.
Yeah. All right. Another quick one. Well, this one may not be too quick. This is from Taryn Vanderhoop, but she wanted to talk about ways that people can move forward and be more plastic free, but being mindful of wider environmental sort of justices and privileges. So she talks about, giving up berries that come in plastic at many of the grocery stores, but then to do so, it means driving further to a farmer's market to then, go do that. And that's a form of privilege. And then there's CO2 burned. And so there's a whole sort of life cycle analysis question embedded here. But I don't know. I'm curious what you think about balancing these things. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to balance and weigh these decisions of, when do I go that extra mile and when do I maybe not? And how do we figure that out?
Yeah, look, great question, and something we think about all the time. And I know at a personal level, it's really reduced the variety of what I eat and the places that I shop. Yeah, so look, that's a common thing when people first start out. They tend to drive a long way and just try and live exactly the same without the plastic packaging. And that's very difficult. And there's actually a story in the book of two women who realized they'd taken that to such an extreme that the following year they started their own bulk food store, because they realized there was nothing in their local community to support people.
I love it.
But I think for me, one of the most important things about this, everything has a footprint and we're always making trade-offs. But I think from that whole, the carbon footprint and looking deeply at the climate emergency, my diet is certainly much more local. So when you are eating local fresh produce, what's in season, supporting local businesses and local farmers who need us more than ever, that certainly kind of goes a long way. And I try now and eat as not only as plastic free as possible, but as local as possible. And in some instances, that will mean choosing plastic. If I were to buy bananas grown in my state,
Right.
they would come in plastic, whereas the bananas from overseas or the other side of the country, they're a variety that's thicker skinned. They come unpackaged, but there's a lot of food miles there. So
Yeah.
we're always making trade-offs.
Totally. One final question. Okay, this is the final. I know you have to go in a minute. Do you surf? I don't even know that. Do you surf or do you not? That's not the question.
Probably one of the few people working on these issues that don't surf.
That's okay. I assume you like the outdoors and I assume you have a favorite place. And so if you could take one person in the world with you to go do your favorite activity in your favorite outdoor spot, who would it be? Where would you go? And what would you talk about? This is any person in the world you get to bring with you to have this moment with you.
Okay. I don't surf. I love to see kayak.
There you go.
And I don't do it enough off my local beach. I was going to say Jack Johnson is our ambassador, but in this moment, I'm going to say Maya, my niece. She's just moved to Canada. She's 11. Got a beautiful quote from her in the book. She's someone that really loves the environment and being outdoors. And in this time of lockdown, I don't know when I'm going to see her again. So I just want to go for a paddle with her and talk to her and find out what this incredible moment in our time means for a 12-year-old. So
I love that.
I'm going
That's
with
really
Maya.
sweet. I like it. Maya. All right, cool. Rebecca, thank you so much. Thanks for the work that you do. Thanks for taking time to chat with us. I know you have a busy month ahead. It's July, Plastic Free July. So I'm very excited for you and for the work that you do. And thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Reese. I really enjoyed your thoughtful questions as well. And you keep up the great work as well.
Cheers. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks to Rebecca for joining and for sharing all of that incredible knowledge. And now it's on you. You got to go to plasticfreejuly.org. Again, that's plasticfreejuly.org and take the pledge. It's okay. You don't have to go cold turkey. Just take the first steps. If you know there's some place in your life that you can improve, what's that one thing that you can take out of your waste stream? And if you're already skipping a lot of the single-use stuff, you've got your Hydro Flask, you're skipping straws. What's that next level? Where can you improve? Is it time to do a waste audit and go through your trash? Send us photos. No, don't send us photos. Don't send us photos of your trash, but do maybe take a look at it and see if there's somewhere else you can improve. Be sure to also check out Rebecca's upcoming book. It's available for order, I think, in Australia and New Zealand, and it will be in the US. We'll link to it in the show notes. And stick around at the end for a recording from our friend Taylor on how he's going plastic-free in his day-to-day. Remember, if you want to participate, shoot us an email with your voice memo at oneocean@wslpure.org, and we'll maybe feature you in a future episode. As always, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for the reviews lately from a few of you. We really appreciate it. They really help the podcast grow. If you haven't done so, throw us a review. Appreciate it. And that's it. You can find us in all the usual places online. And now, here's Taylor. See you next week.
Hey there. This is Taylor Lane, creator of the Cigarette Surfboard, calling from Venice Beach, California. And especially during these wild times with so much single-use plastic being used as a result of COVID, I always try and make an effort, if I'm ever going to order anything out, to not include single-use plastic utensils, or if there's an alternative for things to be packaged in, paper, etc. But beyond that, I always carry a little bag in my car. Wherever I'm walking, I might just snag a couple pieces of plastic that I know are inevitably going to end up in the ocean. And definitely after I surf, I always try and grab a couple pieces of plastic as well. And beyond that, just take notice of what plastic items in my life I can get rid of and don't need, and always try and push friends and other family members to take on alternatives, even though this is a pretty wild time we're in. But all those actions do add up. So keep up the good work.
Do you like that? Well, if so, subscribe over there and then watch more videos over there. And then tell us your favorite videos down there. It's a 3-step process. Do them all now.